Welcome to the Mise podcast. I'm your host, Josh Sharkey, the founder and CEO of Mise, the culinary operating system for food professionals. On the show, I'll be interviewing world-class entrepreneurs in the food space that are shifting the paradigm of how we innovate and operate in our industry. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy the show.
Yo, they say art mirrors life with every stroke of the pencil. I'm giving you folks a glimpse into.
My guest today is a celebrated author and chef. She has a James Beard and an IACP award under her belt, and she may be the undisputed queen of turning leftovers at home into something absolutely delicious the next day. Tamar Adler spent time working for incredible chefs like Alice Waters at Chez Panisse, Dan Barber at Blue Hill at Stone Barns, and Gabrielle Hamilton at Prune. She's been an editor for Harper's magazine and written for countless other magazines like New York Times and Vogue and New Yorker, and many more. She's the author of several books, most recently a cookbook iteration of her award-winning book, An Everlasting Meal. And Tamar and I talk about a lot in this episode. Things like why chefs can make great writers and why sometimes they don't. The similarities and differences between Alice Waters and Dan Barber. How Tamar thinks about mise en place in her writing. The value of being impulsive sometimes. And the similarities between making a family meal in a restaurant and cooking with leftovers at home. I had such a good time talking with Tamar. It had been way too long since we had last caught up. And as always, I really enjoyed the conversation, and I hope that you will as well. So enjoy.
Folks to admire, I create when inspired. Quote prices when I'm hired. Osiris in the flesh from a life that was prior. I create the art, Craig goes finds the buyers.
I'm going to wind up a little bit of your background and then throw a couple things at you to get us started. Because you, Tamar, I mean, we're talking James Beard and IACP awards and just such an accomplished writer and chef, you know, Vogue magazine, New York Times, New Yorker, Harper's. And then you obviously worked in a bunch of kitchens, Gabrielle Hamilton at Prune and Chez Panisse and Stone Barns. So you have this incredible background. And the fact that you are, you know, writing now is such a treat for us as chefs in the industry, as well as I'm sure for everybody, you know, as home cooks. So I guess my first question for you is, maybe it's a little bit too direct, given all of your background, but because Chez Panisse is such a fabric of the food world, how did your time at Chez Panisse with Alice and your time with Dan at Stone Barns, how has that shaped you as a writer?
I don't think that's too direct. I think maybe it's just super direct. It gets to the heart of it. Even though I feel kind of lame saying it, I really think that those two places shaped my outlook and my approach to food more than anything else. And then by extension, what I wrote about. Because I think that both Dan Barber at Stone Barns and Alice and all of the amazing cooks who work with her, and, you know, she wasn't cooking, obviously, when I was there. So it was really all of the chefs and cooks with whom I cooked at Chez Panisse, have an unbelievable appreciation of the materials themselves with which we cook. The physical things that we turn into what we serve our guests is what I think is like at the center in both of those places. The love of ingredients, but not in like a fetishy way, just what felt to me like a true materialism, a love of the material itself and an appreciation of every part of it in both places was so strong and suffused the menu and the way that we treated each thing and what we did with the tops and the bottoms and the little liquids left over so thoroughly that I really, based on those two experiences, started seeing food as really started seeing every part of every vegetable and every part of every animal, like in the middle of the stage, like every single part of it seemed valuable to me. And maybe part of it was knowing, you know, in both of those cases, knowing exactly who grew each carrot and exactly who grew each artichoke, and the farmer themselves bringing it into the restaurant and visiting the place that they grew it and seeing their hands and sort of understanding everything that had gone into the cultivation of the vegetable or the animal. And I think part of it is also that, you know, there was just a level, Chez Panisse certainly, cooking is so simple that there's really time to deal with all of a vegetable and all of an animal. And I think both of those have ended up guiding how I think of food, which is that every single part of everything you make is not only usable, but a spur toward another meal. And I really credit those two experiences.
Yeah. It's funny that Dan is almost like an extension of like the next thing after Alice, and that Alice just champions, these ingredients, the raw ingredients. And she's really just the champion of all of the, the asparagus or the artichoke or the onion. And she just wants to tell that story. And that's what she wants to do. And Dan wants to tell that story, but then he wants to, create a new line of thinking of like, that story about that artichoke. Well, guess what? Also, here's this new line of thinking about artichokes. And maybe that's a little bit of a story about me as Dan. Has all of that translated into how you actually write a story, write a book, start writing?
I think the way that I write mirrors the way Alice and Chez Panisse treat ingredients. I think that the way Dan tells, like, sort of elaborates that story is much more like intellectual and crazy. And like, I feel like Dan's cooking is like Borges, like totally, absolutely crazy, intellectual, beautiful, all over the place, conceptual, poetic, all these things. I don't think I've ever written like that. And I have never cooked like that. I think I'm much more basic. I think that the connections that Dan draws are awesome. I don't always have like even the attention span for them. Like I think I'm just a person of simple pleasures.
Yeah. Well, I think that there's poetry in that too. I mean, just in the same way a haiku is basic, but still poetry, and some prose that's very long is still poetry. It's just true to who you are. Dan is that. Can't just take an artichoke and, perfectly poach it and serve it on a plate with some olive oil and, lemon. Like that's just not Dan. That's not his who he is. Whereas it's Alice, and you lean more towards, you just appreciate that, these things in life. And then of course, sort of what else you can do with them. But I think that's just who you are, which I think definitely shows in your writing as well.
When I first got to Chez Panisse, which I think was in 2006, Russell Moore, who had been a cafe chef for a long time, was in the process of opening a restaurant called Camino, which is now closed, but when it was open was my favorite restaurant in the world. I think it was the best restaurant ever. And it was just spectacular and strange and perfect and idiosyncratic. And Russ, at that point, Russ was kind of filling in as a cafe chef sometimes, I think just to make money while he was waiting for his restaurant to be opened. But he loves all of the odds and ends and bits and like the strange, deliciously flavored liquid as much as I do, or more than I do, because he's, older, like by as many more years as he has on me. And there was one time when he was filling in as the cafe chef, and I was working at the cafe, which was just upstairs at Chez Panisse, and I'd braised a lot of artichokes. And then I think we were also doing, either the artichokes were for a lasagna, like a really beautiful, like many layered lasagna. We were going to do like a thinly sliced layer of them braised, or maybe puree. I don't know. Or we were going to do a lasagna the next day. And after I braised the artichokes, I saved the artichoke braising liquid, which, I mean, as you know, it's like this super intense distilled like essence of artichoke and garlic and savory and oil. And it's just an elixir. It's amazing. And as I was pouring it, I was emptying it from a rondeau into a, like, whatever, a 6-pound or something. And Russ came over and he saw me doing it. And he said, "Tamar, I'm so happy to see you doing that. I'm the only other person who insists on saving every single ounce of artichoke liquid." And then from then on, we like had this wonderful, every time he filled in, we had this wonderful like thing where both of us were always like grabbing the very, very, very end of stuff and like drizzling them into everything. And like cardoon liquid also, because it's quite bitter and metallic tasting, but there's also something wonderful about it. And so whenever he was the chef, I would choose a dish to make that like had the most like weirdness and most, I don't know, the most flexibility. And then I would be like, "Russ, I put the end of that, remember whatever it was. I like combined the artichoke liquid and the cardoon liquid and a little bit of that weird vinegar that we had last week. And I put it in and he'd be like, oh, thank you. And that was just a wonderful, like, to share that with somebody was both hilarious because we were both kind of joking all the time, but also dead serious that it was that was going to make the dish, as delicious as it could be, which I completely stand behind. I wasn't doing it to like prank the restaurant. I was doing it because I'm like, this has everything in it. We need, if we're going to even put a tiniest little like ladle full of water on this, we're not going to do water. We'll do this like murky liquid. But he and I would always have these like little crocks.
I love that.
Containers of our, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, artichoke barracool liquid is freaking delicious.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're going to weave in cooking and writing into all these conversations, but you also work for Gabrielle Hamilton for a while, who also has written. Do you think chefs make great writers?
No. I think it's amazing when chefs are great writers, right? Like I think of Gabrielle, I think of Shayna Lowe, Banayan from, I might say Banayan wrong. Banayan? Shayna Lowe Banayan. I think of Shayna from Cafe Mutton, who had a book come out last year called Elegy for an Appetite, and Cal Peternell. But I don't think that, I think that chefs often have a medium already, and it is food. And that maybe if they were allowed to write their own cookbooks rather than having like cookbook writers sort of imagine a voice, it would be different. But I think that when chefs are great writers, it is so spectacular because you get them in a different medium. Like I think, like my brother was saying on your podcast 2 days ago, I think that we are all expressing ourselves through our food for sure. But it's so cool when you're used to hearing somebody through their bologna sandwich or their oyster omelet, and then you get them in words. It's such an awesome experience.
Yeah.
I just don't think do you think that chefs make great writers?
I don't think I have enough empirical evidence to say yes or no. I think some of the, there's not enough stat sig, to say whether they are not. I think some of the characteristics of a great cook, being disciplined, being self-motivated, obviously being, creative and being able to think independently are like really great traits of a writer. There's probably a lot of similarities to cooking and writing. But I mean, what do you think makes a great writer?
Hold on. I want to go back to that because I think you're right. You make a really good point. And it's something that I've thought of every time I finish a book. There are these stretches of like really unbearable work. They usually come during the edit process, but it's sitting in one place at a screen, often for periods of like 10 hours at a time or 18 hours at a time, meticulously reading with 100% concentration and attention every single word. Because as I get close to the last time I can make an edit, the last time I can change a comma, the closer I get to the end, the more of a sense I have of high stakes, and that's when I'm like, I need to know that every word is in the right place and every idea is right. And if I say 25 minutes, it's 25 minutes. And if I say a tablespoon, it's a tablespoon. And like, there's a kind of endurance that comes into play at the end of writing a book. Less so with articles, but a little bit with articles, where like you have to just be able to, it's a marathon and a sprint. Complete focus, unmoving. Who cares what else is happening? Who cares how you feel? Who cares how your body feels? I don't care if you want to go for a run. If you're hungry, then you can have some peanut butter. Like that reminds me so much of service.
Yeah. The difference though, it's very hard. That it seems so much harder to me because you can get through service, right? It's you see the end of it. You can get through all the prep that you need to get done. It's tangible. There's a line of sight to the end. What's terrifying for me with writing when you have to finish something is there is no line of sight to the end. It's not like, okay, now I just need to, in 3 hours, this will be done. This could be 3 hours or it could be 30 hours.
No, because there are deadlines. It's the same thing. It's the same. It's the beginning. Think about like Saturday night in a busy restaurant when it's like, this is impossible, right? Like that, this number of tickets will never be gone through. That machine will never stop that noise, which is like we can all hear in our souls. I am, like it's 7:00 and I'm out of pizza dough. All that. And you're like, I'm going to make more dough while they're firing that ticket. And it's going to proof really just create insane things and get upstairs as quickly as I can. The things that you have to do are crazy. But at some point, the last ticket comes in, that. And it's the exact same thing when like they can say, if it's due on August 10th, you can push it by a day or two. Maybe you even push it by a week, but eventually your deadline has come and the last ticket comes in. And it's always with books. And I remembered it with this time. I had forgotten because like I've gone soft and I haven't cooked in a restaurant in a long time. And I haven't even done like a crazy event. And I had forgotten how painful it is to go through those periods of sitting in one place and doing nothing else and giving it your total focus and not giving up and being like, there's still another 400 pages. This is impossible. And I was reminded doing it this time that it is super useful to have had various experiences that feel really, really very much like this. And I think cooks are like the focus and like getting things done and determination thing. I completely agree that I think that if a chef does have a book in them, they're more likely to finish it than anybody else.
Yeah.
Because they're not going to be like, you can't really deter a chef from doing something, right? My brother and I have talked about this so much that like in the zombie apocalypse, we would take like chefs over Navy SEALs because I don't know anybody else in whom I have such complete faith that like the problem will be solved. The thing will be done. I don't know how anybody's going to get there. And I don't know, like, it's going to be pretty wacky, but like, we're getting out of this. Like the zombies will not get us if we're all line cooks.
I'll take it.
We will prevail.
I love that. Well, so obviously, in cooking, we have this idea of mise en place. I read you mentioned before that you've gone through phases of like how you plan for your books. Like you had this one sort of like 3 documents, things to go in, an outline, and then what gets on the page. And then you have sort of more of a laissez-faire approach at some, like how do you like prep for a book? Is there a semblance of your mise en place when you start writing on, for the day, or like, how do you prepare?
The true answer is I don't prepare well enough because mise en place works so well for everything that I should do better. I'm starting a project that is a secret project right now, but it is one that I am so intimidated by that the only way for me to approach it was the mise en place approach. I'm approaching it like doing every single stage completely on its own, thinking about no further stage, which is kind of how mise en place works. Like it's so much easier to approach cooking anything when you're just like, I'm just chopping the onion right now. That's chopping the onion, putting it over there. I'm chopping the tomato, I'm putting it over there. Chopping the garlic, I'm picking the herbs. And you just do all of that. And when you're doing that, you're not worrying about whether you should put the basil in. Like there's some benefits to putting the basil in early, right? Because then it gets like really stewy, but then it tastes like cooked basil. If you put it in at the end, then it tastes like fresh basil. Totally different. But when you're picking the basil leaves off the stems, you're not thinking about that. You're just thinking leaf, 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 leaf. If I'm intimidated by a project, as I am by this current project, I totally, as a crutch, I will do that. So like I wrote on Post-it notes. I'm in my office and one whole wall is covered in Post-it notes that are every scene that's going to be in this project. And so and that's all I had to do. Not think about words, not think about anything else. And actually before that, I, on big pieces of paper, wrote down like characters and their backgrounds. And then the next stage of it was going to be just transcribing the Post-its, but that was too close to writing and I got really thrown off course. And so a friend suggested that I dictate the Post-it notes.
Oh, that's cool.
And then have it transcribed. So I did that. So I just stood in front of the wall and I read them and then had them transcribed. The thing that I think really doesn't work for writing, just like it really doesn't work for cooking, is like while you're in the middle of chopping the onion, being scared that the onion will start caramelizing when you just wanted it to get to sweat. Like that just gets in your way. And it's like helpful for me I feel like I'm in therapy right now because it's helpful for me to talk about how useless that is in cooking and how much that would slow you down if you were like, oh no, but what if I don't add salt until later in the onion sweating? It's like, no, just chop the onion. And I think that's definitely when I have the most success in writing, it's when I do that, which is kind of like for article writing, it's everything I want to go in and then like get it on screen and then worry about like a list of everything I want to go in, then get that all on screen and then worry about, making it all work together.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a very famous writer by the name of Eminem.
Yeah.
One thing I love about his practice is he writes every single day, and 98% of what he writes, he's fully aware that it will not ever be in a piece of his music. But the act of constantly putting his thoughts down keeps him sharp. Do you feel like with writing, if you stop for a long period of time, you get rusty? Or are you constantly writing even if it's not going in something? Or
I think I'm rusty, but I want to read where he said that. I think he's right, for sure. Yeah, I've written mostly cookbooks. That's not true. I've written all cookbooks. And so I think when I was writing my first book, I probably wrote every day. Maybe it's lucky that I've always had like a concrete project to work on. So I've kind of worked on that. But I don't have a practice where I sit down and write every day. And I definitely should. And I'm definitely rusty and dull. Where did you write that?
He said it in a interview somewhere, maybe on like one of the radio shows or something. And I think then Dr. Dre also reiterated it. But I found it fascinating because I was like,
that makes sense.
What was fascinating about it was the idea that it's okay that most of what I'm going to write is not going to go anywhere, because that's scary, right? It's just like, wait, am I wasting time? And no, you're just the act of actually doing the thing is so.
Yeah. And I mean, especially that's actually really helpful to hear, especially because I always think that like hip hop is such a refined form in that, things have to work in such clear, specific ways as it's poetry, right? So like, because it's so refined, you're not going to get, sure, maybe sometimes people get straight there, but of course you need to like have a block of marble before you can chisel. That's how I would picture hip hop being made, because the word choice is so specific and the rhythm is so specific. And I think that, probably every time I think I have a good sentence in a book, it is because I've written 1,000 words around it. I don't think I have a practice like Eminem and Dr. Dre, and I think I should, but I do know that for every good sentence, I've written conservatively 100, but probably more versions that are not right. And then at some point it's right. Or the sentences that end up in the book took 1 second to write, but I wrote all this other crap that was never going to end up there.
When I heard it, it made me think about cooking, because his reasoning behind it was the idea of the rustiness was his superpower, his job is to like take ideas and turn them into really pleasant things to hear. And so he has ideas every day. And so the notion of writing down his ideas every day means that he knows that 98% of his ideas are bad. Whenever he has a really good idea, he's so adept at being able to write it down and be able to like translate his idea into words that those 2% are going to be great. And it's the same thing in, I think about cooking and being so sharp and cooking every day. And I remember when Brandon and I were developing recipes for Bark, there was, we have this idea as chefs of like, oh yeah, sometimes you just create a dish and it's right the first time. And you think, well, we just got it right. And no, usually what that means is just like you have so much practice. You've done this so long that you know the amount of salt you want and acid and heat and sugar, and you just happen to be in that zone when that happened. I feel like that zone is really in any of these creative processes. If you can get yourself to be in that zone exactly when you need to be, it's a huge skill set, which is really freaking hard because you have to be kind of on all the time. And I'm sure for writing, it's hard because you can't have a project every week.
Cooking is so much easier for me than writing. And it's so wonderful to not I've thought about it so little. I mean, I think everything I've thought about cooking, I've published. I don't actually think about it very much. It's a very self-contained act for me. Like I cook constantly and I feed people constantly, but I don't analyze it a lot. And so to hear you, like just to talk about the analogs between cooking and writing is so interesting because I've almost never thought about it. And I think you're totally right that lots of times, I mean, I have conversations in my kitchen all the time where people are like, wait, how did you know that was done? You know, we'll be in the middle of a conversation and I'll stand up and go over to the stove and turn something over or turn something off. And, you know, or like, I'll just like make something and they're like, I don't get, see, this is why I don't cook. Like, I don't get it. And I think I'm bringing to bear every single thing I've ever cooked, right? It looks, all you see is like the Chinese calligraphy single line, but in fact, it's the like thousands of hours that are being brought to bear. So I know that like, yeah, I know the eggplant's done because I can smell it. And so it's like, I just know, but that's not because I'm a genius. That's because like I've made so much eggplant.
I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to talk a bit about your creative process and things like how you know when something's done. And I want to read a quote that you said because I really liked it, specifically because it helps in thinking about the process of creativity and like getting stuck in analysis paralysis, although it has nothing to do with writing. So I'm just going to read this because I actually wrote it down. So you said, we settled on our son's name in less than a minute. I don't know if this is improvisation or impulse, but I think I sort of believe on a cellular level that no matter what I decide, there will be good and bad, perks and drawbacks. I'm always yearning for something else. And I'll always find something worthy in what I've chosen, no matter what. And I think when I read that, I was like, okay, so you picked your son's name in like a second. And your thought was, yes, this might be the wrong decision, but it also might be the right decision. And no matter what, we're just going to make a decision and we're going to be happy with it. And that's really hard. And like the idea of, when I think about writing, it must be monumentally harder than in cooking of just like, okay, what am I going to write? And you could spend hours thinking about the way in which you want to articulate this idea into a paragraph. And with that said, I'd love to just understand your creative process. Like, how do you know when something's done that you're writing? And what is the process of ideation like for you once it's like on the page?
You're such a good interviewer.
Oh, thank you.
You're really, really great at it. I appreciate that. I don't think that I ever feel like anything is done. I think there are like, you know, small instances of feeling. I can think of probably every moment I have felt like something was done. I think most of the time it's closer to what I said in that quote, which is, it is not done. It is better than it was before. And maybe it's still worse than what in my mind exists as the ideal version of this, which still exists somewhere. But all I can do is get as close to it as I have the physical and spiritual like endurance to do. And then say, this is enough. I don't think I've ever made the thing as it exists in my head. A very simple cooking analogy, although I think this can be done. I think cooking is so much easier, is like, you know how I think we all have, or at least like, you know, those of us that grew up in contemporary North America, especially like on the coasts, have some idea of like the platonic tomato basil sauce, right? Like there's some marinara or, you know, whatever, some like tomato, basil, garlic sauce that tastes, or you can imagine the taste. And I remember when I started cooking, like when I just graduated college, I lived in a house with 6 people and we had to each cook dinner for the whole house once a week. You know, I was 21 years old or 22. And I was like, I'm just going to make tomato basil sauce. And every time I made it, it didn't taste like it tasted in my head. And I was so frustrated by that I went on a like slightly manic bender and made tomato basil sauce every day, even when it wasn't my day to cook. I would just be like, don't worry about it. I got your day if you're okay eating pasta with tomato sauce. And I made it putting in the basil and then like putting in an immersion blender and like pulsing it a little bit so that the basil would get like more dispersed throughout, and like pounding raw garlic and adding it at the end, slicing the garlic, chopping the garlic, pureeing the tomatoes before putting them in. I was trying to get to this kind of original tomato sauce. And now I think it's not just one thing. You don't need one trick. It's just about the tomatoes caramelizing and there being enough fat and a good balance. And so I think you can do it a bajillion different ways. And I know when I'm there, and there's so many ways to get there, but it's about like, caramelization and fat. But I didn't know that then. And that process is really, really close to how I think most writing is for me. We're like, I'm trying to get at this like platonic tomato basil sauce, and I get as close as I can. And then when it's close enough to that, because then when you really think about it, right? And you go, okay, well, how would you know if you were there? The answer is you would never know. Tomato basil sauce does not exist in the mind. It only exists in real life. And so like the platonic book or whatever that I imagine, or the perfect house or the perfect child's name it doesn't exist. We are always going to be, short of it because it's in a plane that can't contain it. And so I think it's that like good enough point. And I've certainly been, I don't know if it's like to the benefit or detriment of my writing as I've gotten older and been in more therapy. I have more and more embraced the idea of good enough. Am I working as hard as I can, headed in the direction that I want to be going? Yes. Yeah. How close am I to the deadline? Yes. Okay. Like, all right, I got to stop now.
Perfection is the enemy of good, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
This podcast is brought to you by Mise, the culinary operating system for food professionals. As a chef and restaurant owner for the past 20 years, I was frustrated that the only technology that we had in the kitchen was financial or inventory software. Those are important, but they don't address the actual process of cooking, training, collaboration, and consistent execution. So I decided if it didn't exist, I'd do my best to get it built, so the current and next generation of culinary pros have a digital tool dedicated to their craft. If you're a chef, mixologist, operator, or generally if you manage recipes intended for professional kitchens, Mise is built just for you. Organize, share, prep, and scale your recipes like never before, and get laser-accurate food cost and nutrition analysis faster than you could imagine. Learn more at www.getmise.com. The thing with writing, that's tough about this is what I do now in technology. Perfection is the enemy of the good. You want to get something out, and you want to get people touching it and feeling it and responding to it so that you can iterate and keep changing it. And the same thing is with cooking, right? You can put a dish out and then start to tweak it over time because of feedback that you get. What's fucking terrifying is you can do that internally all you want. Maybe you can crowdsource ideas, but like you write a book, it's out, it's done. Like there's no like, okay, now I see that the response is this. I didn't articulate this well enough, or this came across the wrong way. Like you're done. That feeling must be like really like when you ship it off to the editor, for the publisher for the last round. That's got to be scary, right?
It's so terrible. And with my first book, I'd never written a book before, and so this is a cautionary tale to whomever is listening to this. Don't do what I'm about to describe under any circumstance. After my first book, right when it came out, so when I first had it in, hardback form, I obviously every night after that happened, I would like sit around and drink a lot of wine with people and just like try to, I don't even know if process or like avoid the fact that I had just published a book. And then when I went to bed, I would read parts of the book that I had just published. And almost to a T, one night I would, like, let's say it was a Tuesday, drink a bunch of wine, go to bed at midnight, whatever, and lie in bed reading these pages that I had just published. And every other day, I would feel so proud and feel like, oh my God, I've done it. This is genius. Like, look at what I've done, and like want to climb up to my roof and, crow. And then the alternating nights, I would feel physically sick and cry and just like feel ill, not because of the wine, but because of the book writing, and be like, this is so horrible. This is such a failure that I don't know what to do. Like, can I take it off of shelves? It's probably not on that many shelves. Like, should I change my name? Should I maybe nobody will read it. Nobody will read it. I failed. This is my one chance. And so I learned that the better thing to do is spend all of your time reading what you have written in the lead up to its publication. And then, depending on your strength of will, try to never read it again.
Yeah. Well, and I think, well, first of all, it was incredibly well received. So I'm sure it's a lot like opening, a new restaurant. And, for anybody that's opened a new restaurant, your own restaurant, every single corner, you're like, that paint is messed up in that little corner. And this chair is a little bit off. And the things that you are able to pick out, no one else does. And the overall messaging is what matters most. But I have to imagine that that's scary. But in terms of like, I know you run, or at least you were running and then maybe you got hurt a little bit. How much does running help with your thought process?
100%. When I get kind of injured, I used to run a lot. I run less now, but I'm trying to embrace like old lady running, where I just like go super slow and listen to podcasts and just don't worry, and just kind of try to not measure myself up against the runner that I used to be, just because there's nothing better. That's when all ideas happen. Do you run?
Oh yeah. I mean, I love running, and it's really the only way. Anytime I have to block time actually from my work day, because it's my strategy time. It's when if I have to solve a problem, if I'm something I'm working through, I don't run, I don't listen to music or podcast. I just run. And that's how I just decide on what problem or what idea I'm going to work through on the run. And that's the length of the run. And, and that's it. Sometimes once a week I run barefoot. And so it's harder to stay focused, but,
ow.
Oh no, it's great. Once you get used to it, it's really, I wear socks, but yeah, running is like, oh my gosh, like it is the best way to think. Now, that said, I don't know how therapeutic it becomes, because it's really, I think about, work every single time I'm running. It's more for me of a tactic for, thinking through problems.
Yeah, but it's also therapeutic, because it actually has been, we talked a little bit about therapy at the beginning of this interview, which I hope stays in, because I love talking about therapy. But
yeah.
I was talking to a therapist friend recently about why EDMR, is that what it's called? There's a thing where you like move your eyes to the right and left while like to deal with trauma. And it's supposed to rewire your brain. And my therapist friend was like, do you know why that works? And I said, not at all. And she said, it's the same reason that going for a walk or going for a run helps. And it's that when you're moving your eyes around to see what's around you, like when you're walking or running somewhere and you have to engage with your peripheral vision, that is in and of itself, that is changing the electrical flows in your brain, your neural networks at that moment. You are building new neural networks by looking around. So anytime you're looking just in one place, whenever you get out and about and you're, looking around you as you have to make sure you don't like trip, or, you're looking at a tree, you are doing something akin to like massaging your brain, because you're just making new little connections where before neurons were just being connected in the same way. So it actually is therapeutic, even if you're working on a problem.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, I'm going to shift gears a little bit here, because you said something when we chatted last that was like a light bulb for me about when I think about your book. Because when I think about both of your books, but we could talk about either one, but leftovers is a big thing. And I think that people get hung up on the idea of you are teaching people how to use leftovers and things. But you said something that was so like, holy shit for me, because it's actually you're basically just emulating how family meal works in the restaurant.
Yeah.
And the idea of just taking whatever is on hand and making it delicious. Was that sort of the impetus for how you started down this path, or is it something that you always loved? Or how has family meal sort of like impacted how you sort of promulgate this message you have about, leftovers and using everything in the kitchen?
I had a restaurant in Georgia with friends. It wasn't my restaurant. I ended up as the executive chef. It was a restaurant owned by a bunch of friends of mine. And I had a cook named Noah Brendel, who now has a restaurant in Athens, Georgia, an oyster restaurant, that Sea Bear. So Noah now runs Sea Bear restaurant in Athens, Georgia. But there was a long period around when I took over the kitchen, where I was tasked with, we had been in the red that month. We had lost $10,000, and my mission was to get us back to zero losses. So I had to make back that $10,000. I had to cut costs and increase revenue. And I had like kind of a month because we had lost so much money in the month prior. And one of the things I did was like make it so that nobody threw anything out and nothing new was ever used or consumed by anybody who worked in the restaurant. And I made family meal every day because I knew that I could trust me. I was just trying to spend zero money, you know? And so, which can be kind of like a game. So I didn't let anybody else make family meal. And I always made something that Noah would call the pie. And he got so miserable.
The what?
The pie. The pie, because every single day I would take leftover grits from the night before, because we were in Athens, Georgia. And I would always do some kind of a reconstitute grits, do a layer of grits, do like some kind of middle layer. So it was kind of like a polenta or grit lasagna, and then do another layer of reconstituted grits. And I was like, look, we're feeding everybody. It's always delicious. Like reconstituted grits and then like ragu or, you know, collards with pepperoncino and another layer of grits and maybe like a little salsa verde or something. Those things are always good. And I was like, this is how I am going to feed my staff without spending any money, which was like delicious the first 3 days. And then Noah was like, T, if I eat one more pie, I'm going to die. And I was like, well, we have to wait until we get, you know, we need to get the numbers this month before we can move off pie. That was like the most extreme version of it. But, you know, seeing the way family meal was done at Chez Panisse, which was after Athens, was another much less extreme, but really illuminating iteration of the same method, which was the garde-manger at Chez Panisse is responsible for making family meal for the entire staff, including the office staff. And they can essentially use, you know, anything that is left over that isn't on the lunch menu for that day, which just meant, you know, being really creative. And there would often be like a cheese plate because there was leftover cheese from the downstairs menu. And they would kind of do much more sort of balanced and less repetitive versions of the pie. And it was always delicious. And it had to be beautiful, right? Because like it was part of sort of Chez Panisse's ethos that we couldn't do like, you know, at Franny's and a lot of other restaurants, there would be things like chicken wings and ranch you could do for family meal once, or like deep fried pizza or like Detroit style, you know, that was not an option at Chez Panisse. It had to be a Chez Panisse-esque meal. And there always had to be a salad, and cooks were not allowed to eat standing up. Everybody had to sit down at tables. And so because of that, it was a really great view into how to use what was left over from the night before service to make a Chez Panisse quality meal. And the meals were amazing. And I think so much of what I sort of transcribed after working there was what garde-mangers did every day so that, you know, all 50 of us could eat Chez Panisse style food at the same time.
It's a skill set that also really highlights a good cook from one that's not. If you can make, you know, family meal. And I think I remember, you know, the pressure when you go to a new kitchen and you're making staff meal, family meal for everybody. It's a lot of pressure, and you have to use leftovers. Although, I mean, look, let's be honest, there's a bunch of restaurants where you kind of do whatever you want, but still it had to be delicious, and it was always something simple. And that skill set is most times, I think, a lot harder than the thing you're serving to the guests, because you have a lot more discerning, you know, eater, and everybody is, you know, there's pressure. And yeah, I mean, doing chicken wings is a little bit easier, but when you really get into it, that family meal, there's a whole culture around it. And I love that you're sort of like now sort of teaching people at home to do the same thing.
I totally think it's one of the hardest things one does in a restaurant, though, if you do it well. I mean, I think we've all probably been in the restaurant. We all as cooks have been in the restaurant kitchen where like it's time for family meal, and then there's some like I don't know why it's always like minute rice with chopped up undercooked like peppers in it or something. There's like a hotel pan of like rice with peppers, and you're like, hold on, we're serving such good food to people. Why are we eating like that? Definitely exists, but that did not exist at Prune. That did not exist at Chez Panisse. And I once asked, I think it was Beth Wells, who I believe is now a chef of the cafe at Chez Panisse, why the garde manger had to do family meal every day. Because I think I was just like sticking up. Garde manger is a position there that doesn't work service yet. It's a pre-service position. And she said, it is like the ultimate proofing ground. You have to get so fast and so good to get a meal for 50 cooked from leftovers they have work that goes up until like 10. They have between like 10 and 12 to get a beautiful meal, which like Alice will come in and eat. Everybody will come in and eat. And it's got to like look good and taste good. And she was like, this is like the main training. When you're done with this.
It's way harder to do that. It's something new every single day, and you have to figure it out. And yeah, there's always that pressure. So I always would want cooks to really understand, the skill of a cook. Just see them cook family meal. I don't need to.
Yeah.
I don't need to work a station. You can learn the station, but can you make them delicious for everybody with what's in the walk-in?
Yeah.
Speaking of leftovers, we're weaving in a little bit, and so I hope that's
Great.
okay. But I heard a story. We talked about you and John, your childhood, but I heard a story about you and your dad, and that he would make you walk barefoot on pebbles to calluses on your feet, which reminds me of my dad as well.
Really?
I'm sure to make you stronger and build,
yeah,
like, metaphorical calluses as well as like physical ones. But you're a parent now. Has that sort of, affected how you parent? And do your kids eat leftovers? Because mine don't.
It has totally affected how I parent, but only in that I don't do it. I don't know if my brother brought this up, but we were brought up, me more than him. He had some childhood illnesses that made my father take pity on him. But when I was really little, the main sort of line in our house was troopers don't. Like the idea was that I was supposed to be a trooper, which I think is like, like a soldier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He was a soldier, right?
He was a soldier, yeah. Troopers don't get cold. Troopers don't complain. Troopers don't cry. When I got big cuts, I was never taken to the hospital. He would just pour like high octane alcohol on it. Like literally, I remember literally like having a huge cut that I still have a scar for, full of rocks, like rock all through into my arm. And he had me biting on a rag rather than, and he was pouring alcohol over it and taking out the rocks one by one. So I definitely grew up thinking that like, being in pain was weak and being weak was bad. So all this stuff. And I'm like very, very, as a mom, focused on not doing that. It's a great handicap to not be able to think it's bad to have sad emotions or bad emotions or experience things badly. So I do none of that. And I try to like embrace, not do, it's not weakness to cry. And
yeah, I totally agree. And same, I think, in some ways I had a very similar upbringing where we didn't talk about those things, and the emotions did not come into play. And there wasn't like, oh my gosh, are you going to be okay? That must be so scary. That just never happened. And it's affected me. It's why I'm in therapy, but it's also why we have this diametrically opposed way of parenting our kids, which is everything that happens is we want to understand their feelings and why, and make sure that they are able to be in touch with those. It's probably part of just how parenting happened back in the day. I mean, also, if you have an Israeli soldier as a father, it's probably exacerbated a lot. Yeah. But, hopefully this new generation is just getting a very different form of parenting because of the old way. But I couldn't agree more. It's just so hard to like even get in touch with your own feelings if you don't start from a young age being able to be okay with them.
To even like know what they are, so now it sounds like you are trying to do the same thing as we try to do, which is like we try to validate every feeling without judging it. Like, you're feeling this. That doesn't make it like good or bad, or it's just like, and I don't have an emotional vocabulary. I'm trying to get one, but without one, like so much of the time, I just don't even, I have no idea. Like, it's like, how are you feeling? I'm like, I don't know. Fine.
Really fine. Totally the same. So funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think I think the great benefit of this is that hopefully our children will be able to identify feelings that they have. And, I'm sure we're messing up horribly in another way that we don't even know about, so we can't talk about it. But right now, this feels good as a kind of response to the opposite. But I'm interested to see what horrible thing what our version of this is.
I know, right? It's all an experiment because you have no idea. We got some problems, right? I'm similar. It's hard to identify the feelings that we're having, but there's other things that, the resilience and endurance hopefully that doesn't go away with this. So who knows?
I know. And my feet were so calloused. I could walk on anything. I mean, I probably could have walked on coals. So strong. No, he doesn't eat leftovers. What are you talking about? He eats toast like everyone else.
Oh my God.
Toast and butter.
I mean, luckily now my kid will eat toast. So that's good. It used to be.
Oh, yeah.
My son will only eat very, very high quality feta. So do not try to put one of the sort of pre-cut or the dry blocks. It's got to be in the brine. If he doesn't know the brine is there too, he's not eating it. And nuts. And now he'll eat some, bread and butter. That's about it.
Yeah, I mean, correct. On all counts. Correct.
Yeah.
My cousin might hear this, but that's okay. Lewis does not eat much of anything, which I'm basically down with. He will eventually. My brother and I both didn't like food very much, and we're both professional cooks, so I'm just not that worried. But I really love peanut butter, and I'm very specific about peanut butter. I really like crunchy, salted, but unsweetened peanut butter.
Santa Cruz? You're down with the Santa Cruz?
I don't. Oh yeah, that's fine. It's
Dark
fine.
roasted.
Yeah, that's fine. Teddy's is fine. The best is the one out of Michigan that we can find the name of. It's been family run for a long time. They sell it at Zingerman's. It is called Cream Nut.
Oh yeah. I mean, let's be honest.
Cozy's is the company. Yeah.
The cream nut chocolate though, there was the dark peanut.
Everything they do. The Cozy company. They've been doing it for a long time. So that's our usual peanut butter. But we will go. Santa Cruz will be a backup. There are B team, Santa Cruz, Teddy's, whatever. Obviously, as a cook in Hudson Valley caricature, I make my own strawberry jam. We get spelt bread from a local bakery. And so peanut butter and jelly in Lewis's head is creamline, crunchy peanut butter, homemade strawberry jam, and spelt bread or other, bread that you buy and you slice and da-da-da. And we were at my cousin's house over the weekend and he was hungry. And I said, okay, I'll make you a peanut butter jelly sandwich. And it was creamy, skippy, and then purchased strawberry jam and, Pepperidge Farm bread or whatever, just what most people have for peanut butter and jelly. And I gave it to him and he took one bite. He said, what did you put in this? Shh, just eat it.
I mean, here's the thing is for me, I'm down with Wonder Bread for a PB&J if it's there, but it still has to be good peanut butter. I can't do the Jif or the Skippy, it just doesn't even taste like.
Right. But back when you hadn't had the Creamline and the Santa Cruz and all that, it was what peanut butter was. And so it was fine. It's just about context. If you hadn't, you corrupted your son by giving him good feta and now you have to deal with the consequences. He can never eat that other stuff, but that's on you.
Yeah. That was a wrong decision, but
yeah, that was a mistake.
I want to wrap this up with a little more writing.
Okay.
So I did want to kind of talk about who some of your favorite writers are. Before we do that, though, I'm just curious because I think about this a lot. I think I've asked this question a couple of times. You write and then you publish things and you're writing for magazines, you're writing books. You obviously are a discerning critic of your own writing. But if you could write your greatest work ever, and you knew it was the greatest thing you've ever written and it was Pulitzer Prize worthy and you knew it and you wrote it, but no one else could read it except you, how would you feel? Would it still be satisfying for you?
That's a wild question.
I can tell you the origin of it if you want.
Yeah. I would love to know the origin of it.
You'll resonate with this. It's those times when you're in the kitchen and you're alone and you make something and you're like, holy fuck, this is so delicious. And no one's there except you. And you're kind of looking over your shoulder to remember, taste this. And there's no one there to taste it. When you sort of parallel that to being a chef and what that means, I think about sort of the reasons why we're a chef, but the same goes for writing. So I'm just curious, how you would feel.
Yeah, I'm so glad you told me the genesis of it, because I am thinking about the specific moments when I have been in the kitchen and made something that is the most delicious thing I've ever made. Or on some occasions, I've even thought this is the best bite I've ever had, right? This is the most delicious thing I've ever eaten. And then I often fantasize. I'm thinking about where my mind goes, and I will fantasize about having a restaurant where I serve that to people. That's like a clear pathway. It's like a way of coping with, because it's first delight, then mourning. Then, as you said, like, so maybe it's delight and then denial. Denial is looking around. Maybe there is somebody else here, right? And then after that, a sense of mourning. No, I'm alone here. Nobody else. And then I think I fantasize, would like imagine that other people would be able to taste it. And then that fantasy, I think, helps me move through it with cooking. I had that this morning before this call, after therapy, and before our interview. I had breakfast, and I had made aioli 2 nights ago, and it's garlic season right now. So it's with garlic that is as good as garlic gets, because it's fully bulbed out, not green garlic, but just picked and not cured yet. So aioli with good olive oil and that garlic is, I think, one of the most delicious things one can eat. And I had leftover boiled potatoes and a few leftover cherry tomatoes and leftover boiled beans and fairy tale eggplants, all cold in the fridge. And other than the fact that refrigerated potatoes are not as good as newly cooked ones, which was an issue, it was so mind-blowingly delicious that I went through this whole process while I was eating breakfast. If I ever had a restaurant again, on the breakfast menu, I would put like aioli with leftover vegetables. They'd have to be like cooked the day before and then refrigerated, except of course for the potatoes. And like if I had a restaurant, could I boil them the day before, then leave them out overnight? No, that's like bacteriologically, the whole thing. I went through the whole thing. And by the time I was done, I was like, okay, I'm fine. I can just eat now. And I don't know how that works with writing. I don't know. I know that I experienced that with cooking.
It's a little bit more devastating, I think, with cooking, or at least more tactile, in that it's gone.
It's gone.
Food has a shelf life, so you can't give it to somebody later. And even if you could, it wouldn't be the same. Writing, technically you could, but who wouldn't love winning a Pulitzer Prize? But if you had the Pulitzer Prize winning book, but only you knew about it, would you be happy? Would you die a happy person?
Maybe noticing how one answers that question on a day-to-day basis would be an interesting exercise, right? Like to understand why one was writing that day. Like maybe there would be some days where it would feel like, yeah, that would spur something.
It forces you to think about why you write, right?
Yeah, right. And I think that for kind of a long time now, I think when I was younger, I think I wrote for me. But certainly, I mean, I've been doing, essentially culinary instructive writing for like a decade. And that's with a specific aim to try to transform the way people think about something so that by the time they're done reading it, they are transformed. I'm trying to enact transformation so that when they're done reading a chapter, they feel different and they think of things differently. And that's what I'm trying to do, based on how I've been approaching writing. It would be like, no, hell no. All I'm doing is trying to communicate with people. But then it also sounds really tempting.
It's funny. It reminds me of Tim Ferriss said something about writing that I found analogous to entrepreneurship, or really just like creating anything. He said, you should never write a book unless you can't not write that book. And I think a lot of that with creating a business as well, like starting a business, like you should never start a business unless you can't not, because both of those things are incredibly hard, very unrewarding for the most part, and, will tax your whole soul. And I imagine you have to have some of that as well, given how much you live and breathe so much of what you're doing that relates to your writing, that you couldn't see yourself not doing this.
I think that's such good advice. Michael Pollan once said that to me when I forget if it was before my first book or after, but he said, don't ever start a book that you're not madly, passionately in love with, because no matter what, you will hate it before it's done. You have to start so in love that by the time you're experiencing like pain and loathing, you've been in love long enough that you're going to keep going. But if you're not 100% set on it at the beginning, it will be painful beyond belief because it hurts no matter what. That deterred me from doing a couple of projects.
Yeah, I bet.
You know, he was like, if you can avoid it, right? Like if you can't stop yourself, then do it. And then that's the only way that you'll be able to handle everything that comes. And I'm sure it's the same with your company.
Yeah.
Because it must have sucked so many times.
Oh, yeah. It's just grueling. It's like anything. You'll only hear the bad things for the most part. And there's every reason not to do it. And there's every obstacle in the way. And so you have to be, okay with that to continue, like anything. So
I have said to numerous people who have sought book writing advice from me, I have said, and I never know if this is like comes across the right way, but I have said many times, the world is not waiting for your book. Nobody wants your book. Nobody wants you to write your book. Nobody's waiting for your book. So take that out of your mind completely, right? Some people will say they're waiting for your book, but like, that's because it's they mean that, but it's like that's mostly a way of saying like, I like you, but in truth, no, nobody is. And so make your decisions based on that idea.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that when it shows up, they won't love it. And it might transform and reshape and, could change their lives. But don't think that like, if you're late with your book, don't freak out about it. No one's really waiting. It's all on you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if that sounds like tough love or it sounds like, I mean it in a loving way. It should help to know that.
In the same breath, like, and I give similar advice, not necessarily advice, but when people ask about a company they want to start, the same thing I would probably say if someone asked if I should write this book. No, don't do it.
Yeah.
Because if I tell you no, it's not a good idea. And that in turn makes you not do the thing, write the book, start the business, that you shouldn't have done it in the first place. Right. The best advice I can give you is don't do it.
Yeah. And then if you have to, you will anyway.
Yeah.
Which is, that's what you're going to need in order to do it.
Yep. Well, you have another project coming out, which I think you can't talk about much, but is there anything else you want to share with our audience of vagabonds and chefs and whoever the heck else is listening to this?
Yeah, there actually is. So there is my secret project, which will be a long time coming because right now it's transcribed Post-it notes on my computer screen. But I'm going to start an advice column, a culinary advice column. And I am really excited about that. So that's what I want to say. And I think, I don't know the exact format yet, but I think I'm going to, for anybody who's in the Hudson Valley, I think I'm going to have a pop-up like Lucy from Peanuts style advice stand that will sometimes be maybe at Talbot and Arding because it's indoors, but like very sporadically where people can come and ask me anything. And I'm going to try to do it. I know that the world is not waiting for my advice column. It's something I've always wanted to do. I love answering people's culinary questions and I love hearing what they're struggling with. I love being on the receiving end of that and being trusted with those like quandaries and queries. So that kind of like over the last 2 days, I realized that that's what I really want to do. So I guess, yeah, anybody who hears this and wants to write down a particularly vexing culinary query, I look forward to explaining to the world how to get that query to me and then answering them. And that's like, since my book came out, I've been like, I just don't know what I'm going to do next, but I have been trying to be patient with myself about not knowing it. And then I was like, wait, I totally know. So, yeah.
I love that idea. That's awesome. Well, if you ever want to turn it into to digitize your advice, turn it into an app, then let me know and we could do something there.
There could be an app for that.
Mm-hmm.
Huh. Okay, great.
Yeah. Well, Tamar, this was an absolute pleasure. And I really appreciate you taking some time to chat with me today.
I had a great time. You are an incredible interviewer and so flippin' smart. It's amazing. I feel like I only ever knew you in like the back of your restaurant. So this is just a wonderful conversation. I want to know if I did better than my brother.
Oh, of course. Come on.
Right. I did, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm funnier.
You had some, you had some advantages there. A couple extra things under your belt. So
yeah, even with those advantages taken into consideration, I just want it to be clear that the elder Adler.
I'll send him a note that says, "Great job at being the second best." Good. Adler on this podcast.
That's all I ask.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Josh. This has been wonderful.
Thanks for tuning into the Mise podcast. The music from the show is a remix of the song Art Mirror by an old friend, hip-hop artist, Fresh Daily. For show notes and more, visit getmise.com/podcast. That's GETMEEZ.com/podcast. If you enjoyed the show, I'd love it if you can share it with fellow entrepreneurs and culinary pros, and give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. Keep innovating, don't settle, make today a little bit better than yesterday, and remember, it's impossible for us to learn what we think we already know. See you next time.